In the second main division of phenomenology of perception, Merleau-Ponty turns to an explication of the concrete structures of the perceived world. Again he attempts to delineate an alternative to both empiricism and rationalism. Both views, he argues, simply presuppose a fully determinate objective world. Empiricism locates the subject as a thing in that world, construes the relation of world to subject as causal, and constructs its account of experience on that basis. Rationalism takes the world to be for a knowing subject and analyzes experience accordingly. Neither takes its stand within that ambiguous living experience, in which objects come to be for us. Accepting this task, Merleau-Ponty provides accounts of our concrete experience of sensible qualities, of spatial location, depth and movement, of shape, size, the natural thing as a unity of sensible qualities, and finally, of the world as that open unity which forms the ultimate horizon of all our experiences. Preeminent in all these experiences is the role of the body, its capacity to merge into a given perceptual situation. As when, without any thought, it manages to grasp the true colors of things, despite abnormal lighting conditions which change the objective stimuli which are present, to respond to the solicitation of ambiguous data, to grasp through the unity of its perceptual powers the unity of qualities in a thing, to be present through the perceptual field to a world which is ever incomplete. The last and perhaps most interesting chapter of Merleau-Ponty's account of the perceived world deals with the other self and the human world, and draws on many of the basic insights developed in earlier sections. We are not only conscious of natural objects, he notes, but also perceive about us the artifacts and inhabitants of a cultural and social world, the human world. And the first, the most basic cultural object, he argues, must be the body of the other person. Only on the foundation of our perception of others is a cultural world accessible to us. But objective thought would make perception of the other impossible by construing all bodies as mere objects and the subject as a pure thought self, a sheer self-conscious, rational surveyor of the objective world. This would make it unintelligible that a body could ever be truly expressive of a subjectivity, and that there could ever be another thought self for me. But as Merleau-Ponty has shown, I am not a sheer thought self. I am rather an embodied, perceiving, behaving subject, and thus the other's body is not for me a thing, a mere in itself. My experience of embodied subjectivity allows me, prior to any sort of explicit analogy or judgment, to grasp another consciousness in its embodiment. The perceived world, as that unity which forever outruns my determined grasp of it, is also crucial here, as my different perspectives slip into one another and are united in relation to the perceptual thing. So my perspective and that of the other slip into one another and are united in the world in which our communication is possible. Language and the experience of dialogue, of course, play an important role. Our thoughts are woven together in living reciprocal speech. But, Merleau-Ponty adds, the plurality of consciousnesses, their difference from one another, is an inescapable fact. The anger or grief which I grasp in another's behavior, for example, do not have the same significance for both of us. He lives what I merely perceive. We have common projects, but each participates in it from his own perspective. Solitude and communication, Merleau-Ponty warns, must not be taken as exclusive alternatives. Rather, they are two aspects of our ambiguous human condition. Thus I can recognize that the other is imperfectly known by me only if I do have experience of the other. Merleau-Ponty proceeds to criticize Sartre's claim that I must either make an object of the other or allow his gaze to make an object of me. Another person's gaze is felt as unbearable, he says, only if it replaces possible communication, and the latter retains its truth. He concludes by asserting that I am neither in society as one object among others, nor is society in me as an object of thought. Rather, the social is a dimension of existence in which I live. The third and final main division of phenomenology of perception deals with being for itself and being in the world. Here Merleau-Ponty discusses self-knowledge, the cogito, temporality and freedom. Developing the position of Descartes, idealism has argued that objects must be for a subject, which is for itself, which knows itself, which somehow contains within itself the key to every object that it could possibly encounter. But the mind is not a sheer for itself. Merleau-Ponty maintains the cogito does not involve an absolute and total self-knowledge. Thus he undertakes a critique of traditional doctrines of the cogito. He argues first that contrary to Descartes, I can be no more certain that I see than the thing I see exists. Nor do I possess absolute self-knowledge in respect to my will or feeling. I can't, for example, think that I am in love without truly being so. I do not know myself so much in myself, in some inner and immediate self-presence, as in act. It is by action and expression in the world and through the body that I achieve determinacy and clarity for myself, so that the cogito is inherently conditioned by temporality. Thus the I think is dependent on the I am, even in the sphere of so-called pure thought, geometrical thinking, for example. My grasp of truth is dependent on my bodily orientation to the world, through which I can fundamentally grasp what a triangle or a direction is. Moreover, thought is inherently dependent on speech, and the clarity achieved in a given thought is dependent on an always somewhat obscure context which has been formed by past acts of experience. The centrality of this phenomenon of acquisition in our mental life points again to the inherent temporality of all our grasp on truth. These critical reflections on doctrines which would grant to the mind an absolute grasp of itself or of the world do not, however, lead Merleau-Ponty to reject the cogito altogether. There is, he says, a presence to self which precedes and conditions our explicit grasp of ourselves or of the world, a tacit cogito which precedes the spoken cogito. But this tacit cogito is inchoate and must be expressed in a verbal cogito in order to attain clarity. The ultimate subject, Merleau-Ponty concludes, is not the sheer self-present non-worldly ego which constitutes the world, but a being which belongs to the world. The fundamental role of time in relation to all sorts of phenomena is indicated throughout the phenomenology of perception, but it becomes the explicit theme of Merleau-Ponty's reflections only in the penultimate chapter of the work. He begins by arguing that time is inseparable from subjectivity. Without a subject there is no present in the world, and without a present there can be no past or future. But what is the fundamental relation of time and subjectivity? The subject cannot, he says, be simply located in the now, and its consciousness of past and future explained in terms of physiological and psychological traces of the past. Such traces, being purely present, could not ground our opening onto past or future, but neither could time be a constituted object for a non-temporal subject, before whom past, present, and future were equally arrayed. For if they were all alike present, there would be no time. Time, then, is inseparable from a subject, but this subject is itself inherently temporal, is situated in time, and grasps future and past on the horizon of a flowing present which accomplishes the transition between them. There is an essential interdependence between temporality and the thrust of concrete subjectivity toward a world and toward a future in which it can, in both senses of the term, realize itself. The final chapter of Phenomenology of Perception is a subtly reasoned and eloquently expressed reflection on human freedom. Initially, Merleau-Ponty notes, the only alternative to a causal and deterministic conception of the relation between the subject and the world, a conception which would in effect make a thing of consciousness, is a view of human consciousness as wholly free, independent of all motives of nature, of one's past temperament and history. In this view, which is essentially that expressed by Sartre in Being and Nothingness, even obstacles to our freedom are in reality deployed by it. It is my choice to reach a certain destination which makes certain objects into obstacles for me. However, Merleau-Ponty responds, this abstract conception of freedom would in effect rule it out completely. A wholly indeterminate freedom would lack even the possibility of committing itself, since the next instant would find it again indeterminate and uncommitted. Rather, he argues, the choice once made must provide some impetus to personality, must establish a direction which tends to conserve itself. Because I am not a sheer self-conscious subject, but an embodied being like other human beings, my free choices take place against a background of possibilities that have a kind of preliminary significance for me. The mountains appear high to me whether or not I choose to climb them, and because I am a temporal being, like my established character and habits, although they do not cause, they do incline me to certain choices. Freedom is always then a taking up of some meaning or some motivation, which is offered by my situation in the world. I can reject one preferred meaning or motivation, Merleau-Ponty says, only by accepting another. And even if a man, being tortured, refuses to provide the information his torturers demand, his free action does not reflect a wholly solitary and unmotivated choice. It is supported by his awareness of unity with his comrades, his preparation for such an ordeal, or his long-established belief in freedom. Man is neither a mere thing nor a sheer consciousness. Human life involves a continual synthesis of the forward self and the inner self, a taking up and shaping of our finite situation, a reciprocity of self and world. We are truly free not by denying our natural and social situations, but by assuming it and living it. Thus, philosophy recalls us to our concrete existence in the world, where, Merleau-Ponty suggests, our proper task is to commit our freedom to the realization of freedom for all.